drills this evening, so should the fire alarm sound, exit via the nearest route, which is out the back there and down the stone steps and out into the car park. Do not use the lifts, do not re-enter the building. So, timings in terms of what we're going to get through today, we'll do a couple of minutes for apologies, a couple of minutes to approve a last minute. We'll then 2 to 3 minutes on declarations of interest. We have no written questions from the public, but should anyone wish to ask a question, they are free, but will not necessarily get an answer this evening. 2 minutes on the progress update, 5 on the work plan, and then into the big business. Let's try and aim at 30 minutes for item 7, island planning strategy, 30 for corporate complaints, and 20 minutes on item 9, and then we'll have members' questions at the end. So, apologies if we have any.
Got no apologies, but we've got Councillor Claire Critchinson for Councillor David Adams as substitute tonight, Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of minutes, someone propose the minutes as an accurate representation? Yeah, Chris, and seconds of Ryan Michael. Thank you. I'll sign those. Go. Any declarations of interest? Councillor Lilly.
I want to ask 2 questions of point of order on declaration of interest. Right?
I don't think we take a point of order question on declarations of interest, I'm afraid. Have you got anything personally to declare?
I've got 2 particular things which I think affect whether people declare an interest or not.
Quickly then, go on then, I'll indulge you.
One, 2 of the sites that are, this is to do with the island strategy and recommendations 2B. 2 of the sites are being recommended for removal under recommendation 2B are active planning applications. One is in Freshwater Camp Road, the other is in Bembridge Hillway. Both the ward councillors here are on the committee, and I believe that they would be speaking against those applications. Is this putting the applicants at an unfair disadvantage if they use membership of corporate scrutiny to vote a recommendation to remove them from the plan to the cabinet? That's my first point of order. I've got a second one. The second one?
Go on.
5 of the members of this committee are members of Isle of Wight Council Planning Committee, including the chair and the vice chair. And as the two of the sites are active planning applications, are the members of the planning committee on this committee in danger of being predetermined if they vote for these sites to be removed? There are also cabinet members on planning committee that could be in the same position on Thursday, and this could be the case at full council.
Okay, and Councillor Medland.
Funny enough, in a similar vein, I've also wanted to declare an interest on all of item 7 on the island planning strategy. Personally, find myself deeply conflicted between my role as a ward councillor, as a public critic of the draft island strategy plan, and on the other hand, my role as chairman of the planning committee and my wider sense of responsibility, particularly for the LGA peer review priority of approving the draft island strategic plan. Therefore, I do not wish to participate in any way in this item. I have checked this with the monitoring officer, and he's agreed it's an okay thing to do.
Okay, just very quickly on your point of order, Councillor Lilly. I don't think it is the responsibility of this committee to stifle debate. We've spent a lot of time going round, and our informal meeting has come up with some proposals I think it's important to discuss. Now, as councillors, we will bring with us as whatever we think some form of bias based on the ticket we stood to get elected, and that applies to all of us. So I wouldn't single out Councillor Robertson or Councillor Spink as having any more or less than any of the rest of us. I do think that when we get to the item, it is for us all as councillors to listen, to be prepared to change any mind or any predetermined mindset we may have, and also be prepared to discuss to change other people's minds if that's so fit. So I thank you for your point of order, but I am not going to act on it at this point in time. Thank you. Public questions. Anybody who'd like to ask a question? Just here to listen. There must be nothing on telly, that's all I can say. Progress update. Hopefully you all had a quick glance at the progress update. Nothing to report really. Any items that seem to have slipped are being followed up one way or another. If anybody's got anything they've spotted that they want us to have a quick focus on, please say now, or we shall move on. Anything from anybody? Okay. Same for the work plan. We've got a pretty full work plan. The next agenda is properly full. At this point in time, there's no mention of the island plan on any future agenda for corporate scrutiny. Let's see if we can keep it that way after today. And we've got quite a lot in for coming, which is good. It's a good position to be in. There's some really important things that are coming up in that. So any other comments on Councillor Lilly?
I just wanted to raise, to do the work plan, also the forward plan, that the review of the public health partnership function of Isle of Wight Council and Hampshire County Council should have been a cabinet on the 8th. It's not on the agenda. I believe it's going to be in October. But because that is very much about the corporate relationship between Isle of Wight and Hampshire regarding public health, I think that it should be on our agenda at the next meeting. Right.
Yeah, Chairman, that really would be a matter for the Policy and Scrutiny Committee for Health and Adult Social Care. Public health comes under that.
Yes, but I also think that there is an actual role because it actually is about corporate relationship.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy, but again, we'll need to check with Councillor Nicholson to make sure we're not duplicating effort. Okay. Anything else? Councillor Spink. I do this every time. Quirk. Why do I do that? Sorry, Chris. Councillor Quirk.
I understand there was lively debate at the Policy and Scrutiny Committee for Children's Services about the schools, and if that's likely to come back before that Policy and Scrutiny Committee has had the opportunity to, well, if they don't get the opportunity to look at it again, I think it should come back to this committee because it's a very fundamental issue, is the education of children on the island. And today's results suggesting that we're at the bottom of the league table of, does seem to be somewhat pressing.
Yeah, that is fair comment. And now, as it stands, we're talking about PAN numbers. Yeah, as it stands, there is an action for Councillor Andre to go away and work with the head teachers and governors on what happens next. Do you want to add anything, Councillor Andre?
Just to highlight, because I don't think we've actually had the outcomes of that committee come through yet. The recommendation, as I understood it, was that the paper would go to Cabinet, but I would exercise just a note of caution, just to highlight that the results that have come out so far are very, very broad based, and they are based on an old county system. We will get the full granular data in October, where we will be doing a full analysis, and you can be sure, Councillor Quirk, that the results of that will be coming to the appropriate committees. But I think we do need to exercise caution in drawing conclusions at this stage from the Ofqual report. Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else on work plan from anyone? Oh, so we're getting into the exciting bit now. Item 7, Island Planning Strategy. Now, I would like to propose, because there's quite a lot of recommendations here, I'd like to propose that we vote one by one on the recommendations to put forward rather than en bloc, because I'm worried that something gets lost if there is a feeling against one particular item. So that's what I'd like to propose. Is anyone prepared to second that? Oh, everybody. Crikey, there we go. To be fair, Councillor Lever had his hand up first. Okay, so that will mean, so we've got recommendation 1 will be a vote, recommendation 2A a vote, recommendation 2B a vote, recommendation 3 will be a vote, recommendation 4 a vote, and recommendation 5 a vote. Some of them are just for advice, but there we go. Now we'll open each item up should somebody want to speak for or against. I think that's fair enough, is it, Paul? And then we'll vote at the end. Councillor Robertson.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Would you permit, nevertheless, arguments being made for the set of recommendations in the main, even if you're going to take consequential votes, because some of these recommendations are particularly advantageous, some may say not advantageous, but in the context of the other recommendations.
Yeah, absolutely. My job is just to chair this. I have no view either way at this moment in time. So yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we can make it even more complicated as well if we try, but we'll try and get through this. So, starting with recommendation 1, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm supportive of recommendation 1. I'm supportive of all the recommendations. I think for some very simple reasons, not least of all that the recommendations, if they were to come into the plan, and we now can see the text of what the plan would look like, which I think is very helpful, then it would provide for a greener plan because 4 fields are being taken out. It would provide for a plan that sees more genuinely affordable housing because it envisages a future whereby an area of Newport is regenerated, and that area of Newport is largely in public hands, owned by the council, some of it. And therefore, the homes that could be built on that land could be affordable to an island definition of affordable. It could also be retained for affordable rental. Land that is in the hands of developers or landowners can only ever have affordable housing built on it by national definition. And we all know that the national definition in some areas on the island, particularly Bembridge and Freshwater, are not affordable to the majority of islanders. So simply for the greenness of it and the affordability of it, I think all the recommendations are highly worth considering and voting for, and I should be voting for them. And if I could just address some numbers points, because I have received some criticism. I think that Councillor Lilly has more words to offer this evening. But if we look at numbers between the July draft that was put out to consultation last year, July 2021, and the amendments we have today, let's be absolutely clear. It sees a reduction for Newport, a reduction of 385 homes. It sees a reduction on the Camp Hill site that this time last year was 1,200. The latest amendments are for 800 homes. It sees a reduction for the Ryde regeneration area of 333 homes. That is the reduction between the July draft last year and the amendments we have now. So it is entirely fair and logical that it follows that villages should be able to have a reduction where the arguments have been made and won. And the arguments, in my view, have been made and won in relation to 4 fields, 2 of which I happen to know well, 2 of which have been subject to a flood investigation, 2 of which are in a draft flood report that I have seen, and are both contributing to flooding of the village. So in terms purely of an argument on fairness and equity, all 4 of those settlements I've just mentioned see a reduction in housing allocation. And the combined reduction of Newport and Ryde is 4 times the number proposed to be reduced in Bembridge. And in terms of the new wording, which is recommendation 1 for Newport, which I support, there is no proposal to reallocate Bembridge and Freshwater homes for Newport Riverside, none at all. The proposal is, on page 30, that the Newport Harbour allocation, which is pre-existing, may represent the first phase of a wider regeneration opportunity within Newport Town Centre. And that, I think, is a reference to the County Hall area. Working with other stakeholders, and that, of course, will include the Community Council, including various public sector landowners, the Council will undertake feasibility studies and technical evidence work to establish whether any opportunities can be unlocked. The new wording does not say homes will be built on County Hall. It says to establish whether any opportunities can be unlocked. So there is no transfer of allocation from Bembridge and Freshwater into Newport Town Centre. And I think anyone can agree that the officers and the Cabinet should be prepared to look at whether there are any opportunities in and around County Hall. That is only as far as the wording goes. And for that reason, I back all the recommendations including recommendation 1. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Anybody wish to comment further on recommendation 1? Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not necessarily speaking against this because actually I'm in favour of the overarching recommendation. Sustainable development on brownfield in areas where it's most needed by islanders. Of course, that's entirely sensible. I just think my query, and I brought this up at the informal meeting we had as well, was just whether specifying sites within this is necessary, because the overarching recommendation, by its definition, would prioritise the sites that we're specifying. So I'm not too sure what we're gaining out of particularly Newport Riverside, which is a site that in this document itself says that a background will need to be done about expected yield. Essentially, we don't know enough evidence about this site yet. So to propose that it's a priority just seems to undermine itself for no real reason when the overarching recommendation does that anyway. So, I mean, if we can, I would vote for recommendation 1 if we can remove the specific mentions of the sites within there. Sorry if that makes things more complicated.
I expected nothing less. Yeah, Councillor.
It's really hard to get councils to move on anything, and the less specific you make it, the harder and harder it becomes. And I think it's really important. You tell them what you're going to tell them, you tell them, and then you tell them again. And that's what we need to do here. We need to define quite clearly what the sites are, because I think the more you water it down, the less chance you've got of delivering what we need to deliver.
And you are in your rights to make that debate to Cabinet, should you wish, as this goes forward to Cabinet. So, Councillor Garrett and then Councillor Lilly.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you're hearing me. I'm currently in a very beautiful part of the world, the Lake District, but I thought I'd break into my holiday because the recommendation 1 so specifically has an impact on Camp Hill. Camp Hill is expected to, under this recommendation, to move up from an allocation of 750 to 800 houses. What needs to be borne in mind are 2 things. One, the reduction that Councillor Robertson spoke about earlier from the draft last year reflects an extremely important aspect of this site. That's a reduction based on drawing in the red line boundary away from Parkhurst Forest. Parkhurst Forest is extremely important environmentally. It has ancient woodland, it has sites of SSSI and sites of importance for nature conservation. So the reduction there on the Camp Hill and other MOJ sites reflects the part on the officer's part, something I still do not agree with, that we need to protect the forest. We do need to protect the forest, and I believe that Scrutiny would be well placed to further consider whether the red line should come further away from Parkhurst Forest in order to do that. Second, Camp Hill is regularly referred to as being a brownfield site. I offer an invitation to any member of your committee and any member of the council to come for a walk on that site. You will see green fields. The only brown there is the scorching of this intense summer heat that we have had. But if any lands are important, then because of their greenfield status and their ecological importance, in this case, the ecological link to Parkhurst Forest, then that has to be considered alongside any other greenfield site on the Isle of Wight. This is not me being selfish. I do believe the numbers should be lower for the area that I represent of Parkhurst and Honey Hill. We're expected to take 1,025 houses over the planned period. That's because not only is there the Camp Hill site, but 3 other sites that take us to that number. It's effectively adding half of Bembridge or more in half a ward. And that needs to be considered very strongly because the environmental impact is huge and the infrastructure impact is huge. Those sites can only empty out onto Horsebridge Hill, Parkhurst Road, and through Standard Avenue to Forest Road. There is no way you can develop through the forest without destroying it ecologically. So there's a very important infrastructural argument for bringing down that allocation. The strain on that part of Newport would be immense. Bearing in mind the roads that we're talking about are also the roads that service Cowes, which would have a greater development site. So this is not some out of the way place which traffic would be a minor consideration. So I would urge your committee to ensure that it has an evidence-based reason for adopting recommendation 1 if you do. As I read your papers, I do not. I think there is a sentiment-based reason there. And if of course, the committee does adopt this recommendation and Cabinet goes forward to take it forward, at least I have placed on record those arguments I would develop at the Planning Inspectorate, that I don't believe the Council has properly looked at protecting the forest and coping with the infrastructure strain that the allocation to Parkhurst and Honey Hill would have. Thank you very much, Chair, for indulging me this evening.
Thank you. Just to make people aware, Councillor Garrett is not a member of this committee. I was allowing him to just respond in terms of it being his ward. Councillor Lilly, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to make 2 points. One was actually mentioned by Councillor Garrett, is that anyone on the island can, through, if the plan is passed on the 21st, there'll be 6 weeks for further consultation before it goes to the planning inspector, and under a particular thing called section 19. That will enable people to, put their views on the specific agreed plan or, through the full council, and for that consultation to go, their views to go directly to the inspector, and the inspector to be able to call them to actually, face to face regarding that. And actually, a lot of the particular change, especially when I'll bring this up again through the sites, on particular sites, is the opportunity to actually put that kind of parochial specific view. I think we have to look at a broader thing of the whole plan in perspective. The other particular thing, I just want to question particularly Councillor Robinson's point about affordability. And, within that, in the last 2 years, right through COVID, the price of housing on the island has gone up. In Ryde, it's gone up nearly 40%. And actually now you've actually probably got houses in Ryde and also in other parts of the island that are starting to match the price of Bembridge and Freshwater and others. So actually this argument about affordability is an island issue, not just a Pacific village or a Pacific area. And I just want to really make that point.
I think of all the meetings, I think we all agree that. I think, and to be fair to Councillor Robinson and Councillor Spink, they have repeatedly made the point about affordability. What we all need to do as we move forward as a full council, all 39 of us, is agree a method of affordability that makes sense. And there are frameworks out there that already exist, and it's not a 20% reduction, it's based on average incomes, and we just need to find a way about making that work. Any other points on item, vote 1 on item number 7, or shall we move to the vote? Councillor Spink.
Yeah, Chair, it's not specifically a point on recommendation 1, but perhaps something I should have made clear at the outset, and that is this, that I will be asking for a motion to be considered that the draft island plan is not put, as it were, the recommendation of this committee is that it is not put before full council or because of proposed changes in the law, and in addition because of now the publication of proper census figures rather than the forecast that we used in 2014. So I'm happy to vote on these recommendations, but I will be asking, and I think it's only right that people know, the members of the committee know and understand, that I will be asking for a motion that, although those are the amendments, should it go to full council, I will be asking for a motion that this committee recommends that it not go before full council for a limited period of time, and at the moment anyway, up until the November meeting, because of changes in national policy, and also because of the availability now of actual figures to determine the housing need rather than projected figures. I can of course elaborate on that in due course, but I didn't want it to be felt, as it were, that I was going to vote for these matters, which I will do, to the amendments, and then I take everyone by surprise by suggesting, however, that it not go before council in September.
Okay, yeah, we'll have a little think about how we to deal with that. But thank you, Councillor Spink. Councillor James Evans.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for indulging me. So we've got sort of two hats on here. One as local member for Newport Central, which I've represented for 13 years, was growing up here. And I just wanted to sort of say thanks to Councillor Robertson for his approval of the reworded page on the opportunities that may exist within the harbour and Newport Central, or town centre. However, I do have a couple of issues with these items 7.1, 2, 3 and 4 within that recommendation, because I think, as Councillor Lever pointed out, I think they do weaken the overall, the page that you referred to. I think that page has taken quite a lot of work to get right. And I'm glad that you agree, that you think we have got it right on there. But this does undermine it. And also, if you go on to a recommendation 2, 7.4, it says here, 2B, it actually specifies 300 dwellings to be built on greenfield sites in Bembridge Freshwater, so I'm paraphrasing there, are going to be then put into number 1 above. So it says specifically the number of houses and where it's going to be, i.e.
Sorry to interrupt, but that will be an argument for you to take to Cabinet rather than here.
It's just, I'm just trying to have these discussions now because I find it confusing. I think that the headlines are all fine, as Councillor Lever's pointed out, but it's just these individual bits, and you're asking Cabinet to I'm trying to understand why you want us to do that, and especially about, because for me, affordability is fantastic, but it's about viability of sites as well, and we don't have the information, and Scrutiny possibly asking Cabinet to make it a priority to do a lot of work, which may take 3-4 months, may take years, we don't know. But we've also got, as you realise, we've actually got a big regeneration strategy that we've been following through from previous administrations. So I'm just trying to get some clarity, because it's very important that I'm here to listen to what you're saying, but then the Cabinet can then make an informed decision, having listened, that it's going to fly. We all want an island plan.
So you're right. However, you have the ability and the beauty to go through this all again at Cabinet. So these are just ideas or recommendations, whichever way you want to take it. At the moment, we just really want to go decide whether they're putting them forward to you. So this isn't, we're not saying you need to do this. We're saying you need to consider this at Cabinet. We'd like you to. So the discussion that you're having needs to take place at Cabinet really, rather than here. Councillor Fuller.
Just a quick one from concerning what Councillor Spink said. I don't know whether you're aware, Councillor Spink, but there has been an announcement that's been made that there will be no change in government legislation until at least 2023. Nothing coming in November, so I don't know where you've got that information from, but certainly from the planning press today, I was advised that an announcement had been made by the new PM that no change was going to happen until then. So the delay could be longer than what you're suggesting.
Well, the basis on which I'm putting that it is likely that there will be a change in national policy is that the very recently appointed new Prime Minister.
Sorry to stop you, Casper, and it's not because what you're saying isn't important. If we save that when we get to the point you made earlier, because I'd like to move us to vote on this point specifically now, because I think we're in danger of going back through. Thank you. Thank you. So moving towards, we're voting on whether we put forward recommendation 1 to Cabinet. Those in favour of voting, raise your hand. 2, 3, 4. Those against? suppose I ought to vote as well.
Then, so that's 4 each, Chairman.
Oh dear, I should have abstained, shouldn't I? Put myself in it. I use my casting vote, and I will vote against. Okay. Recommendation 2A. Who would like to speak in favour or otherwise?
Favour of that, if I may, Chair. The main part of recommendation 2A is to give for development outside of settlement boundaries the same protection that those areas had under or have under the 2012 plan. So under the 2012 plan, SP1 says that for developments which are either outside of the settlement boundary or not immediately adjacent to the settlement boundary, development will not be supported unless an identified local need can be established. The principle of the draft plan is to put, as it were, development in the most sustainable areas. And yet the draft plan unamended does not give a protection to areas outside of settlement boundaries, does not give a protection which is in the 2012 draft plan, 2012 plan, namely that it will only be allowed if there's an identified local need. An identified local need means of the parish or area in which the applicant's site is placed. Now, national policy is moving towards giving greater protection to what is mainly greenfield sites outside of settlement boundaries. And it's giving, as I understand it, greater protection in the main and largely for environmental reasons. And it seems to me at a time when national policy is moving towards giving rural areas greater protection, it would be perverse of the Isle of Wight to be going in the opposite direction and to give, in fact, make a sea change, as it were, to less protection than we had 15 or whatever it is years ago. So I ask, please, that those amendments be made to that. I'm not against, I want to make that clear, development outside of settlement boundaries if there's a local need for it. But there should be, in my submission, an established and identified local need before we start developing outside of settlement boundaries. Not only is it environmentally sound, but many people in the West Wight, and there seems to be this perception amongst some people that all the people who live in the West Wight and in rural areas are minted. That isn't the case. Many people in the West Wight and other rural areas, for example, have modest incomes based on letting 1 or 2 rooms to ecotourism. That will be hugely harmed if we start building. People are not going to want to come and backpack around housing estates, and it will be hugely damaging to the rural tourist economy. So for both of those reasons, I would ask please that corporate scrutiny supports the recommendation that the effects of SP1 be given to areas outside of settlement boundaries.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor Lilly.
I actually support this. I don't have an objection against this. I think it's actually strengthens the plan because it actually emphasises about local need, and I think it is important that we have within this. I don't see this actually necessarily divides urban and rural. I think it actually, we all of us have settlement boundaries, right? And there is often green areas across the other side of the road, and that this does strengthen that. And I think it also strengthens the argument of this thing of local need, and I think most areas are now getting housing needs surveys within that, because actually a lot of the jobs across the island are low paid, particularly within the tourist, the care sort of side, and people have to still live near, you know, where they work and things. So I wish to second this and within this. So, yeah.
Excellent. Anything else to add, anybody, on that point, or should we move to the vote? Fantastic. Okay, those in favour of sending recommendation 2A forward to Cabinet? Okay, so on to 2B. Who would like to speak first on item recommendation 2B? Councillor Lilly.
I have great difficulty with this recommendation on a number of fronts. One, I do see, and I've been on corporate scrutiny and vice chair of scrutiny over a period of time, and I have a great respect for the scrutiny process within that. I've been on training courses about this. I actually see what we've just done in 2A as the role of scrutiny, to look at a document, to strengthen the words with it, to emphasise policies and strategies. Recommendation B is identifying specific sites, right, when there's been a process, and I think there was probably 400 or so sites that went down to 40 within that. It was a whole professional process. I feel it is not the role of this committee to identify where particular sites and whether they should be moved and taken at this stage. I do believe that if Bembridge Council or Freshwater or any other areas, and also developers themselves or landowners, they have the right through that 6-week period to go and actually put their case of why something should be removed or not put in within that. And that is fair. That is fair to the communities. That's fair to the developer and the side who don't have representatives here. And I'm not necessarily a totally great supporter of developers and things, but I am a great supporter of fairness. And I think that that is the fairness of going independently, not politically, to the inspector to put forward a professional case of the argument. And if that argument is good, that planning inspector will take out a site or put a site back in. I do not think it is that we should be doing that, because that is a political decision. And I don't think that we should do that. So I will be voting against this, but I also want to make a point that I really question whether we should be looking at the island strategy as a corporate scrutiny committee in regard actual numbers or numbers within the plan. Thank you.
Pat Cameron and then Councillor Robertson.
Thank you. So as iWorks representative, we hadn't had time to do a reach out to all members for member councils to vote on how they felt on this issue. However, I have spoke with members across the island on this, and as an association, there is of course differing views from Bembridge reaching out to us saying they would like me to vote against it, to other councillors and councils saying they would like me to vote, Bembridge would like me to vote for the amendment, others saying they would like me to vote against it. There are multiple reasons why, but I feel as us as an association, we will be abstaining on this because we represent such a broad number of councils. But like you've just said, I think it's important that during the consultation period, the parish councils do input into this. And I think that's where we can feed in. That 6-week window will also give us a chance to make sure we make iWorks representations to that. But yeah, I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. I reject Councillor Lilly's suggestion that this set of amendments haven't been done through a professional process. They've absolutely been done through a professional process. Every single amendment and red line in this was done by the officers of the council. And this council is acting entirely legitimately and lawfully. And I think it's a great shame when a councillor tries to suggest otherwise. But if I can again address the particular sites in question. The July draft of this plan, July 2021, provided for 1,200 homes in Camp Hill. After direct lobbying from the ward councillor, and I don't criticise that, after direct lobbying from the ward councillor, that number on just one site dropped from 1,200 to 800. And the arguments were made that it was protecting greenfield and protecting the forest. I don't disagree with those arguments. In July 2021, when this was out for public consultation, there was a flood in Bembridge and flood waters came out of 2 fields. That wasn't discovered until consultants published a draft report to certain people, including me, in January of this year. So environmental facts became known after the public consultation. And there is an entirely legitimate environmental and human argument to make for those fields not being built on. Indeed, a flood report was only triggered because more than 10 homes were inundated with water, which caused damage to property, and at least one resident still hasn't moved back in over a year later. Those are the environmental reasons. They are not political reasons. And I remind this committee again, RIDE has seen a reduction from July 2021 draft to now of 333 homes. RIDE has 3 cabinet members. Newport has seen a reduction. Newport has a cabinet member. It's now time that the specific environmental and human costs in Bembridge and Freshwater are recognised by this committee. And I urge members, particularly Green members, to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Quirk and then Councillor Lilly.
I was going to make the same point that Councillor Robertson did, sir.
Councillor Lilly.
Firstly, what I'm questioning is that we as councillors deciding on the numbers, we are not professional planners, right? There has been a process through the staff team to come to those conclusions. And it's very, very clear, it was very clear at the briefing that the officers were listening. They came up with a formula to look at sites being removed and putting the numbers into other things. But when actually asked, that if they would be asked by the planning inspector on that decision, it was very clearly said they would say that was a political decision to move the sites. And I think, and it's very likely that the planning inspector would put those sites back. I think it is wrong for this scrutiny committee to make that distinction. All it does in the public eye is actually put community against community, and that is wrong. We should put the arguments through, and in fact, it's interesting from IWalk's point of view, is Cameron has clearly said that you would actually have, Bembridge, for very good reasons, saying we don't want it in. But then you might have RIDE, who actually voted on this recently, RIDE Town Council, saying, actually, we don't want those to be changed. We don't want the site. We're in the same position. We should leave their right to go through section 19, to go to the inspector and put their case direct to him, whether a site should be in or out. I don't think we should recommend. I would also raise, my last point on this, is 2 of the sites, one in Freshwater and one in Bembridge, are active planning applications, right? They're going to be coming to committee before this report, right, is sort of finalised. The inspector will be just sort of moving his in tray round by the time they come forward, and they will come under the current position of sustainable, the balance of towards sustainable development. I think we're creating wrong hopes to those community by actually moving those sites. I will be voting against this.
Councillor Quirk and Councillor Spink.
When the current administration came in, they made a very major announcement that officers advise and members decide. And so I think the Cabinet are going to have to agree with me that the members can make decisions about direction and policy. The officers then implement that. Everything that's in this has been introduced by the officers. The officers have gone along with it. They're not sort of screaming and shouting and saying, no, we can't do it. The officers support what's in there. So, you're not taking a political position. And we can actually look at what's in here. It's got to be in, the plan has got to actually identify, the inspector will expect you to identify the sites. They have to be there, and they've been identified by the officers.
Councillor Spink and Councillor Lever.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. In relation to the freshwater allocations, it's just 2 allocations. Land to the east of the football club in Camp Road, 400, and Heathfield campsite, Heathfield Road. It's not a political, as far as I'm concerned anyway, move. It's consistent. Both of those sites are greenfield sites. It's consistent with my policy on development on greenfield. There is no local need shown. It's justified, as I understand, on the basis that the settlement boundaries will be extended. There's no local need for that housing. And in my submission, it's properly, it should be properly taken out of the plan. Freshwater is not a particularly sustainable area in terms of jobs. Most people will have to travel to Newport to find work. There's very little on offer in the freshwater area. Will increase, therefore, traffic, contrary to other principles of the draft plan. Seems to me an inappropriate allocation. And the fact, as Councillor Quigley says, the fact that it is in the draft plan does not mean that it cannot be taken out of the draft plan, and the decision to do that is rightly the elected members. So I would support this recommendation.
Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I think a point of clarification on something Councillor Quirk said, that the officers support this. I don't think officers would necessarily agree with that. I think officers can accommodate what's in here. I don't think they would say they would support this. No, they can accommodate what's here. I wouldn't say they support it. I think that's misleading slightly. Also, again, as with recommendation 1, I think I'm sympathetic to the intent here, but with what Councillor Lilly was saying, I'm inclined to agree that I'm not sure it's this committee's prerogative to decide sites coming in and out. So for that reason, I'm not sure I can settle square with this recommendation.
I've got Councillor Lilly, Councillor Drew, then Councillor Robertson.
I just want to, we have to be very careful. Councillor Spink is a member of the planning committee. These are live applications on 2 of these sites, and he made statements of houses are not needed. This becomes predetermination language, which actually, if a developer is actually looking at this, or an applicant, he might actually call for a question when it comes to planning committee.
Okay, point noted. Point noted. Councillor Drew.
Thank you, Chair. I think my concern here is that there's been a parallel that's being drawn between the recommendations that this committee makes and a determinative impact in terms of what Cabinet considers. And I think, with all due respect to Councillor Lilly, whose points I do take, I think we do need to avoid conflating what we say here and the way that we are debating this as being somehow determinative. I think we need to keep an open mind. And Councillor's point about not wanting to make this political, I think actually is a very apposite one, because ultimately we should be approaching this from a very broad brush attitude. So I do take issue with the fact of what Councillor Levy, you've mentioned that we are deciding. I don't think we are deciding. I think we are debating. I think that is a valid point. And going to your point, Councillor Levy, about Councillor Spink being potentially predetermined, as a point of law, I would suggest that that is manifestly erroneous. Ultimately, predetermination is when you are essentially saying, this is the way I will vote. Councillor Spink is purely saying this is what he is considering as an obtaining factor. And I think as a Ryde councillor as well, what concerns me is that actually this has become quite a political debate. I appreciate that, this is politics, it's tribal, everybody has a partisan approach, but I do think we need to be careful. And I do sadly deprecate the fact that first recommendation was rejected, because actually this to me comes down to quite a simple consideration, which is we are reducing numbers of housing. Essentially, that's the difference between where we were last year and where we are now. That does have an impact, and any classical economist, indeed any economist, would talk about this in terms of how that will affect younger people. And I think therefore we do need to keep things a little bit broader and try to avoid that determinative aspect. We need to be able to say, these are the main reasons, and these are ones which potentially could obtain in the future. We don't know whether we will. So the argument that actually we don't have the actual scrutiny of what's happening for Newport, for example. We don't know that it's viable. We don't know what the yields are, but equally we don't know the contrary. And I think that's a really valuable point. Thank you.
Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Lever corrected Councillor Quirk regarding whether the office is approved or could merely accommodate. But I think Councillor Lever is also perhaps mistakenly misleading when he says that it's not the role of corporate scrutiny to decide on recommendation B. It absolutely is. It's in a corporate scrutiny report and it's being put before us, and it's text that's being worked up by officers. If for some reason he thinks there's something unethical or whatever words he would like to use, then I take it that he won't vote to block it. Surely he'll abstain if he thinks it's incorrect to have a vote on it. Because to take a view for or against acknowledges there is a role for corporate scrutiny to take. And I agree with him. The role for corporate scrutiny to take is to have a vote on whether these fields should go in the plan, or whether a greener amendment is more advantageous for the Isle of Wight.
Councillor Leo.
Thank you, Councillor Robson, and I appreciate the fact you keep calling it a greener account to try and goad some response out of a Green councillor. Very well done. But a rejection of this is just relaying to the status quo, not necessarily a rejection of it in principle. So I reject that I would need to abstain on this. I can very well reject it without any complication. Thank you.
You may, Councillor Robertson.
The status quo, Councillor Lever, is that these 4 fields are not allocated within a settlement boundary. That is the status quo. The text unamended is looking to incorporate them. So if you want to vote for the status quo, then you must vote for the amendment, which is these fields are currently not in a settlement boundary. And that's the way it should remain by adopting this amended text.
Okay, I'm going to move to the vote shortly, but one question I would ask is would you, both Councillor Spink and Councillor Rob, would you say Bembridge and Freshwater are nice places to live?
Of course, Chair.
So you know what I'm going to ask next is why would you deprive other families and households of living in such a nice place? I do struggle with this. I'm not sure which way I'm going to go at the moment. I'm going to have a little think to go to the vote.
Can I genuinely answer your question, Chair? It's for 2 simple reasons. I go back to green because these are green fields when the housing could be delivered elsewhere. There is nothing remarkable about these fields that mean they are crying out for buildings on them. But also on affordability. Of course, there will be an argument made that a certain percentage can be affordable, but at 80% of market rate, they will be sold at £600,000, £700,000, £800,000 and £1 million plus because of the nature of the market and where it is. So on an affordability point, I would say, yeah, there should have been some consideration of putting some homes in Newport, but unfortunately, you know, you and others on this committee didn't vote for that, and I accept that. But this is about both affordability and greenness.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Lilly, briefly, if you would.
Want to just come back on the basis. I think the affordability issue is becoming is an issue across the whole island. So actually making it into a geographic specific area, I don't think is it. I do not think it is. I have on High Park Road houses going for £1 million now. So I mean it's not, you know, an issue. It's an issue for the whole island about affordability. And actually the whole issue is actually we need social housing, not just affordable housing, and we need housing for social housing for rent, which is, you know, the huge deficit. I also have issue with the thing about you know, the green fields and that. You know, a lot of the urban areas, we have a green deficit. We do not have enough green space for the people that actually live within it. And I think my whole point against this is we shouldn't be getting at this late stage into a point of moving the number. There is a process through section 19 and that to actually do that. And there's also the wording is strengthened, and I accept the wording in 2A. We've all voted for that, which actually means that those communities could go and actually oppose, would have material objections towards those sort of sites. The fact is that through the SHLA, those sites were identified. I do not think at this stage, I could actually argue for 1 or 2 sites to be taken out myself, but I don't think so. I actually think that is parochial and we shouldn't be doing that. And my view of voting against this is even stronger now I've heard the debate.
Councillor Lever, briefly, if you would.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It was more of I guess, a question or challenge to Councillor Robertson that if we were to remove sites from Bembridge, could they be replaced within the Bembridge boundary? Because at the moment, this very specific point is replacing the units lost on these sites with one of those sites would be Camp Hill. And as Councillor Garrett mentioned earlier, Camp Hill is not completely brownfield, so it would likely mean that there would be development on greenfield site in Camp Hill. So can we not find replacement allocations within Bembridge if you're not happy with the existing allocations in Bembridge?
I'm going to let Councillor Quirk first, and then I'll come to you. Otherwise, we're going to move to the vote after that. Councillor Quirk.
The point in terms of the cost of houses is not the cost of the most expensive. It's the cost of the least expensive and the mean, and how affordable they are to people. And one of the things that's really important about where you build houses is you build them where there are jobs. And actually, Freshwater and Bembridge are not great places for jobs. Whereas Newport and the Medina Valley and Ryde are pretty good places for jobs. So, if we're looking to invest and expand, the sorts of areas that you're going to get new jobs and new expansion is in the Medina Valley. So that's where that's the logical place to put your new housing. And in terms of the SHLA, a big chunk of the input to the SHLA comes from developers. So, yes, of course, they're going to be putting their sites that they've got on their books into the SHLA and pushing for them to be accepted. But that doesn't necessarily mean there are valid sites to build on, because it will come to planning. And if the Bembridge site actually comes to planning, I suspect that the flooding issues actually will be an objection from the Environment Agency, and we'll turn it down because it's the Environment Agency.
Yeah, can I answer?
Briefly, Councillor.
I'll answer as briefly as I can, Councillor Lever's question. Yeah, there are houses being built in Bembridge all the time. The increase, as you put it, to Camp Hill is only from 750 to 800, but it's still a reduction from 1,200, which was in the original plan in July last year. But the point is more about land ownership, and those fields are in private hands, so they can't be sold at a genuinely affordable rate. And also, one of the developers who has an option on the land was one of the SHLA advisors to the officers when deciding which site should go in. And you've had that confirmed to you, Councillor Lilly. So there is nothing that says every village must take their fair share. Ventnor has just got an allocation of 10 over 15 years. So there's nothing that requires villages to have a fair share if there's not appropriate land. Benbridge has a harbour on one side, the sea on two sides, and marshes that used to be a harbour on the fourth side. There isn't much space. That's the nature of the village.
Okay, thank you all. I think that might be a lively point. We're not doing so well on my timing. I'm going to phone me KPIs today. So we'll move to the vote. Those in favour of forwarding recommendation 2B to Cabinet, raise your hand. Those against? It's a very tricky one because I can see both sides and I appreciate the passion with which Councillor Robertson has debated this. I also see the other side. My core tells me taking sites out, especially in areas that are seen to be nice places to live, is a bit like a housing equivalent of letting them eat cake. And it does worry me that we're sending a very wrong message to an island that at the moment is in crisis with the cost of living and energy and everything else. So I'm going to vote against. I'm going to vote against. Okay. Recommendation 3. Second holiday homes. Who would like to speak in favour or otherwise of recommendation 3? Anybody? Or we just... Well, I could have guessed. Councillor Lilly.
I'm going to support this one. I think it strengthens particular points that, totally understand the issue of second homes. It's my ward goes next to Seaview, and within that, you've now got second homes moving into Ryde across. So I actually think that this is a sensible thing, and particularly I support it because of community-led planning. It is strengthening the voice, I believe, of communities, particularly the parish and town councils, to get actually involved and listen to. Because my biggest thing, Mrs. Pereira will know, that I've been passionate in planning that developers and landowners actually talk to the communities that they're actually putting their housing, and that hasn't been the case. What this does is it strengthens that. It strengthens that dialogue for those communities to have more say. I believe we wouldn't have had some of the biggest objections to things if people were actually talked to and not actually discounted, because that is what has happened on the island with some of the attitudes of the developers. This means that they have to go and talk to them. And so I totally support it.
I'm glad you went against. That could have gone in a while.
I would say something very similar, really. The fact that we need to place the importance around neighbourhood plans, place planning and all those sorts of issues, it really focuses on the local community and what the town and parish councils know their community the best, and they are best placed to advise on these sorts of issues. So I think it's really important that we focus on the place plans, the neighbourhood plans, and within the whole planning process, but also within this particular recommendation.
Councillor Spink.
Okay. I support this recommendation as well. One of the, not the main concern, but one of the major concerns of islanders who responded to the consultation, the regulation 18 consultation, was that they couldn't see any point in building houses, new houses, which were statistically likely or more likely to be purchased as second homes, and that was contributing to the housing problem on the island. This empowers, it's a very small amendment, in fact, to the DIPS. It empowers local authorities to decide whether or not they want to put in their neighbourhood plans, effectively, that there should be limits on the number of second homes. That accords exactly with what a large proportion of the public were saying at the Regulation 18 consultation, and I would ask please this committee to support the recommendation.
Thank you. Anyone else? No, we'll move to the vote then. We could catch some time back up. And those in favour of putting recommendation 3, second Dolly Holmes, forward.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 9, Chairman.
Any against? Any abstentions? Okay, recommendation 4, environment and commitment to carbon net zero. Anybody like to speak for, against, or otherwise? Councillor Lever.
Again, I think this is probably an uncontentious one, and to move things on swiftly, I'd say this is entirely reasonable, and I'll be voting for it.
Anybody else? Any other comments? Councillor Lilly. Don't feel you have to.
Oh, I do. What is actually good about this was the wording was changed from the biosphere language into the climate change, which actually made it more relevant within that. But it actually strengthens the biosphere arguments within that by putting that into the context of climate change. So I fully support it.
Well done. Thank you very much. Anybody else? One last call. Okay. Those in favour of putting recommendation 4 forward.
1, 2, 3, 7, 8, 9, Chairman.
Any abstentions or against? No. Fantastic. And recommendation 5, Freeport strategy. Anyone like to speak in favour, against, or otherwise? I think essentially what that was putting forward is that we wait and see what happens in terms of the Freeport. Is that right, Councillor Cook?
Yeah, it seems strange that we become part of a major Freeport zone and don't make any mention of it in the report. Now, we don't have the real benefits from the Freeport because we haven't got any sort of customs issues and things like that, but we should be looking to gain benefit from the Freeport. It should be something that we're concentrating on. It should be part of our vision, and we should be trying to get investment into the island based on the Freeport initiative. So yes, I'm more than happy to sort of propose this one.
Thank you. Anybody else? No? We'll move to the vote. Those in favour, including the recommendation to Cabinet.
1, 2, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Any against or abstentions? Excellent.
No,
Okay,
No.
so in terms of that, now that was quite a lot of. That's taken a lot of work over the last however many months from everybody, and I appreciate everything that's been done by those members of corporate scrutiny. What I don't want it to seem is that any of those points that have or haven't gone through is neither a victory nor a loss. That is the point of democracy. You have now Cabinet and full council to take it to next. So it was well done in terms of doing what we were supposed to do. Okay, moving on to point 8, corporate complaints annual report. Sorry, Councillor. Yes, Councillor Spink. Yes, sorry, carry on.
Yeah, I anticipate that there will be some groans when I've raised this point, but that's never stopped me in the past, so why start now? But on a serious note, I am concerned that we might be making a very serious mistake by allowing this matter or recommending that this matter should come before full council later this month. I don't want to kick, as it were, the draft plan unnecessarily further down the lane. But there are, in my submission, 2 extremely important points. And one is that the new Conservative Prime Minister has indicated in no uncertain terms that she will scrap what she has called the Stalinist housing targets. And at the hustings, I asked her, and I put to her in no uncertain terms, that she has a reputation for U-turning. And how could she convince me that she would not U-turn on that? To which she said that she intends to make it part of national policy by amending, I think she said at the committee stage, which is where such amendments are normally made, amending the levelling up bill, which is currently at committee stage in the House of Commons. Now, those amendments would have to be made, if it's to be made at committee stage, by the last week in September, is my understanding. And if it's to be later than that, it's not much more than 2 or 3 weeks after that at the report reading in the House of Commons. Now, much of our discussion, not just tonight, but throughout the consideration of the dips, has been really caused by the fact that there are a lot of people. The main response in the consultation period was that the housing figures to be built on the island, that so-called housing targets, whatever one wants to call them, are far too high. And I don't think that there are many people who disagree with that. Perhaps I'm wrong, but even on this committee, I don't think there are many who disagree with that. But we have been told, and rightly so, that that is dictated by central government, and therefore, effectively, we have to put up with it, except for the case that we can ask for a small reduction of about 100 houses, which is what we're asking for. Now, is it not folly, I ask, that we are considering committing the Isle of Wight to a housing target that the Isle of Wight doesn't want, and the people who voted for many of you on this committee don't want, when national policy has been indicated by the Prime Minister that it will change, and the delay concerned is only a matter of weeks. If the Prime Minister does not amend the levelling up bill, we will know that she's not going to amend it by October. So all I'm asking for is an adjournment until November. That is the next full cabinet meeting of a full council meeting after the September meeting. And I think that if the public knew that we were going to pass a bill, adopt the dips in the face of this likely outcome, I would suggest, of national policy, they would be rightly extremely upset. Now, the second point, and I was going to do this by asking Councillor Jarman, who's produced a number of statistics in his report, and I might still do that, but what I would do initially, perhaps, is just tell committee what I understand the statistics show, because my second reason for wanting this matter to be put back to November at the least is this, that the figures on which our housing target is based are the projected figures projected in 2014. So the projection was that there would be a substantial increase in the island population. That projection was fed into the algorithm, and the algorithm, having received other information as well, came up with a figure of 600 plus houses. Now, the reality is, because we've now got the 2021 census reports, that the population increase on the island has been nothing like that predicted. In fact, the population increase in the 10 years since the 2011 census is 2,100. 2,100 increase in population over 10 years.
So, sorry to interrupt you, Councillor. Do you want to essentially say defer it? Because I think it might be easier that I'm quite happy to allow that as a recommendation to go forward. If you propose and second it and people vote in favour, I'm quite happy to allow that motion to be voted on.
But wouldn't everyone have to vote on it? And
yes. Yeah. So if you're prepared to propose it and somebody seconds you, then we'll have a vote, and then that can go as a recommendation.
Well, I'm just trying to convince people of the way they should vote. And I won't take much longer.
Carry on. Yeah, carry on briefly.
I won't take much longer. So 2,100 Now, if you work that out, that means that we would only have to build 70 houses a year to meet that increase in population. Now, all I'm asking is this, is that surely when we have the figures in front of us, our plan should not be based on a prediction which has been shown to be wrong. Now, I would ask, therefore, that there's a deferment. If these figures that I'm putting before committee don't result in a decrease in numbers when we put them into the wonderful algorithm, then so be it. The figures will stand and come back, no doubt, or arguably in November, unless, of course, we wanted to take an exceptional circumstances, because the change in the figures would amount to an exceptional circumstance under paragraph 61 of the NPPF. I believe that's what the public would want us to do. The public do not want this number of houses. They specifically do not want this number of houses when it will not solve the housing crisis. In fact, if anything, it will add to it. That was the representations given in the Regulation 18. Now, the other point on this is that it is again statistically the case that the population of the Isle of Wight is only increasing because of inward migration. Most of that inward migration, I can't tell you the exact figures, maybe Councillor Jarman can, but it's actually in the draft plan in any event. Most of that inward migration is retirees from the mainland over the age of 65. We do not need that, and we certainly should not be building new homes for them. And that is a recognised exceptional case under paragraph 61 of the NPPF. So I would ask, please, let's be sensible, please. Let's not go against what would appear to be national policy, and let's not go against what would appear to be unnecessary amount of housing being built, the only benefit of which will go to the developers. Let's not do that, please.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to try and wrap this up briefly. We've got Councillor Lever, Lilly and Drew, and then we'll come back to your motion. Just turn your microphone off, Councillor Spink, if you would.
Oh, yeah.
A couple of points is, just for clarification, is Liz Truss can't have made that statement as Prime Minister because she was only made Prime Minister today. So she's made it in the run-up to Prime Minister, and we can only work on what's actually been said. But I'm not dismissing your point. So if we go with Councillor Lever, Lilly, then Drew, and then we'll come back to your motion.
Thank you, Chair. You kind of alluded to what my point would be. Actually, is I don't necessarily disagree with what Councillor Spink is saying. If that changes, then absolutely, there's every argument that we should assess that. I'm just very cautious about us voting to defer something based on an internal Conservative Party leadership election promise and a private conversation between Councillor Spink and Liz Truss, in which is different to what Councillor Fuller was saying earlier about what the official communication has been so far. And as much as I sympathise with the point Councillor Spink is making, I think we can only act on the official communication at this point, would be my.
Councillor Lilly, then Drew, and then Robertson.
Yes, a number of points. I think we have to be very clear that a lot of these issues were discussed with the LGA peer review. And one of the things that came out of that report was ASP, we needed to sign off a draft to get into the process, because there is then an opportunity for further consultation, for all that material then to go to the inspector, and then there will be sessions with the inspector and time. If we don't go into this September, we are going to lose another year. And there are planning applications stacking up, and they will come under sustainable development. The more we move closer to that plan, the more we will have, our communities will have stronger arguments for or against those applications and that. And which is including applications that might be listed in the plan, because it's not a foregone conclusion they're going to get planning permission. within that, because they're actually mentioned as a site or a possible site. So I'm totally against we put any delay. There is real opportunity through that 6 weeks period for Councillor Spink and Councillor Jarman and whoever actually has got figures to present those figures directly to the inspector. And that's the way we should go. Because once we make that decision on the 21st, we've started the train. The train is on the journey. And we owe that to our community. And the experience of people from Cornwall that were actually there, who go through a lot of issues, they said, unless you got a plan, a draft plan into the process, right, you are failing your community. That was a word they said to me. You needed to do that. And I think we've accepted that peer review and we need to actually do it. If members are against the plan or they want to do, they can vote against it.
Okay,
Right.
thank you, Councillor Lilly. Councillor Drew, Councillor Robertson, and Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points I wanted to address. I think I broadly support Councillor Spink, not necessarily for the reasons that he's outlined. My concern is that essentially tonight, through the wisdom of the committee, and I take no issue with that, but we have essentially voted in relation to Newport and affordable accommodation not to move forwards with that. And I think actually the balance is such economically, we know of the cost of living crisis, we know of the many issues, that a lot can change within the next few months. Now, I take Michael's point, apologies, Councillor Lilly's point, seriously. There is that issue of the tilted balance. We do have the peer review, and those are things to be weighed. But ultimately, I do think on balance, protracting it a little longer, taking time to look at some of the views more generally is going to be beneficial. And ultimately, of course, when it comes to planning, tilted balance is a consideration, but there are other material planning considerations. So would something come before the committee that engages those, then that will be dealt with on those merits. And I think that where we stand at the moment, Councillor Lilly talks about another year. I think we also have to look at the fact that we can still attribute weight. This is an ongoing process. Now, admittedly, of course, that a decided plan that's put forward to full council doesn't carry the same weight as an emerging plan, but it still has significance when it comes to planning decisions that we are taking. So I think in terms of what Councillor Spink has said, I'm actually in favour of building in many situations, particularly when we need to do our duty to a younger generation. And I think actually taking a few weeks rather than necessarily a year to see not only where legislation policy from a national perspective stands, but equally where economically younger people stand, what are going to be the problems further down the line. I think it is worth considering perhaps having a wider debate, and I would certainly encourage fellow councillors to contribute maybe a little further before we vote on that.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson, and then Fuller, and then Cameron Palin, all briefly, if you would.
Thank you, Chair. Again, Councillor Spink made a lot of different arguments, but I think the one that is particularly important to consider is the very unfortunate timing of this draft of the island plan going through Cabinet and supposedly going to full council on the 21st of September, when just the day before a bill on this subject matter comes before committee stage in the House of Commons. I think it's very unfortunate. It doesn't really matter whether Liz Truss made comments in private or publicly as Prime Minister or a candidate. That is the timeline for the bill. She is now Prime Minister and those comments were made. It's possible, I would argue likely, but it's at least possible that there will be an amendment to the bill, and a very significant one, the day before full council. I think it would be a great mistake for all councillors to set the train in motion, as Councillor Lilly said, to the extent we can't stop it if there's going to be a major change in direction from government. So it would seem much safer for whatever draft Cabinet want to present to full council, that Cabinet does that to a full council in, say, November, when we know what the government is going to do or not going to do, rather than September. And the deadline for committee stage will have passed. It's not a case of the government might still be dithering. They have to make a decision. So I think it's entirely proper and advisable that this committee should say to Cabinet, together with the recommendations over 1, 2A, 2B, etc., we also recommend that whatever decision Cabinet makes about the draft text, that it should not put that to full council as early as September and look ahead to October or November. So I'll be supporting that if that's the motion that Councillor Spink puts forward. Councillor Fuller, then Cameron Palin, briefly.
Thank you. I made a statement earlier on about my understanding that the planning policy may not be considered by government until next year. I'm still waiting for evidence of that to come to light. This is what I've heard. This is my understanding. However, it may be wrong. I don't know. At the moment, you know, we've got a new PM. She's got a lot of priorities, and it's important that we sort of like look at those. Where we are with the Iron Plan, we had our Regulation 18 consultation first in 2017, 2018. That lay dormant for 2 years. We did nothing. One of the priorities of the administration is that we accelerated the Iron Plan because we need to have an Iron Plan. When we brought in the Iron Plan previously, it was brought in just before the NPPF, so it became out of date very quickly. I think what we have to consider is the timescales involved. We have our Regulation 19 consultation, which will start after this gets ratified by full council. We then have six weeks of the government and the planning inspector looking at that. They will then make their changes. After they make their changes, they will then give us their view of where the Iron Plan should be, and we will then make a decision on that. That could be over a year away, and that is why Michael Lilly made the statement he said. As far as I'm concerned, the Iron Plan can be adapted in line with government policy, and I think that's quite important. One of the things that was raised earlier on was about the reduction in the housing numbers. The reduction that we have is a third less than what standard methodology suggests. Standard methodology says 730 homes should be built on the island this year. We've reduced that to 479. That is a significant decrease. It's not as low as a lot of people will want, but we have to make sure that our plan can stand up to proper scrutiny by the planning inspector. And that is why it's important that we do have an Iron Plan. If we delay much more, we're going to have large applications coming to the island potentially, and that could be fairly negative. We know that there are applications coming up in freshwater. We know that there's planning applications coming up in Bembridge as well. Again, we won't have an Iron Plan that we can determine those decisions on if we don't approve something. So again, it's important that we move forward with that. Thank you.
Cameron.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we've got a list. We've got Cameron, and then Michael. Councillor Lee's going to be very, very brief, and Councillor Lee is going to be very, very brief, and then Councillor Spink is going to be very brief, and then suggest his motion.
One thing that's very clear amongst IWAC members is that we want this plan passed as soon as possible, because obviously, like it's been cited, there's a lot of planning applications potentially coming forward, and we need a plan in place that we can use and get this ball rolling. And it's something that has been brought up a lot of our IWAC meetings, and that, you know, suspending this further, potentially 3 weeks, but then it wouldn't be until the November full council. If those changes were to come through in the bill just before full council this month, surely there'd be the possibility of not agreeing that plan if that bill were to come forward with the amendments made. There's possibilities within that time frame to make those changes if necessary. We just would urge the plan to go through as soon as possible.
Councillor Lilly, Councillor Lever, Councillor Spink, and Councillor Drew. You're going to have to be very, very brief, because I'm going to take them.
I hope the new Prime Minister focuses on the cost of living crisis and getting through the winter before she actually puts time on planning, to the side. I actually think there is a process, as I've said, through Section 19 and then the dialogue with the inspector, that if there is any government changes, they will take place within that, because eventually it comes back to us and then we finally sign it off. So there's going to be plenty of time to actually, whatever the government decides to, or if they decide to fly to the moon or whatever kind of planet they're going to be on, they can actually put in. My little kind of comment, I think we have to be very cautious when we say about over 65s and people coming and we don't live here. a lot of the people that actually do move here in the older age group really contribute to this community. We wouldn't have a voluntary sector if there wasn't a steady flow of people with experience that's actually moving over here and really want to contribute. Can we be a bit careful when we talk about language regarding that?
We won't have as many councillors either. Sorry, Councillor Lever.
Thank you, Chair. And again, apologies, it's a question perhaps a little unfair of me, but I feel this is really important and it would make me even more cautious. But a question, I guess, to Councillor Robertson and also Councillor Spink, Councillor Dew and Councillor Quirk was, if we do delay this and nothing changes from government, the numbers stay the same, would you then vote for this DIPS at full council as it's been recommended tonight, as agreed tonight?
I'm happy to answer that. I mean, I will be looking to Cabinet and appealing directly to Councillor Fuller to adopt all the recommendations, notwithstanding corporate scrutiny hasn't put them forward tonight, all the recommendations in the text. So I think in terms of how I and others will be voting at full council is a slightly different question, and not one that I'm obviously going to give an answer to tonight, because it will depend what happens and what Cabinet decide to do, because it is Cabinet, of course, that will put that final draft text to full council, not this committee.
Councillor Spink.
Thank you. To answer the best I can, Councillor Lever's question, firstly, I would vote like Councillor Robertson I would vote in favour of the draft plan if it includes all of the recommendations. Having said that, I would also like the time to be used until November to look at whether or not we should be relying on the actual census figures rather than the predictions that have been made and shown to be false. Because I do think it's very important that if we commit the island to a period of development, that we do it on the right figures. And the difference between the figures produced by the actual the number of housing that would be required by the actual figures produced and the prediction are startling and dramatic. So I think I've answered your question. I hope I have. If not, no doubt you'll ask me another one. Very briefly on the other matters. It's not altogether, it perhaps doesn't matter greatly, but it's not altogether a private, as it were, pledge by the Prime Minister, although she wasn't then the Prime Minister. It was made at a meeting of, albeit all Conservative Party members, but it was made at a meeting in public to the extent that there were 200 or so people there. And as Councillor Robertson says, we will know whether she sticks to that or not by September or at the very latest October, because it's a slightly grey area that normally amendments are made at the committee stage, which will finish a day before full council. But you can also, as I understand it, make amendments at the report stage. Now, I understand that she's going to do it in the committee stage, but it may be that she does it in the report stage. I'm not certain about that. But we will know with certainty by October. Now, in the greater scheme of things, I don't want us not to have a draft plan or to have an adopted plan. But in the greater scheme of things, it is a small delay, and a delay which I would suggest is only right, so that we get the draft plan, which will eventually become the plan, on the correct footing, in line with national policy and actual figures rather than predictions. We're only asking for, what is it? I don't know, till November, 2 months.
Okay, I'm going to give Councillor Dew the last word.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very quick. To Councillor Lever, I would say that I would be very happy potentially to vote against Conservative members, potentially, if that came to it. I keep an open mind, and I would certainly urge the Cabinet to do the same. I don't expect a particular direction of debate, but what I would seek to emphasise is that ultimately the recommendations which have been made here today are merely guidance. I do think it is fundamentally important that we consider this issue of affordable housing. And I think, unfortunately, that does include Newport. There are issues which need to be debated and fundamentally ventilated. And I would certainly watch that and will watch that with great interest. I will keep an open mind. My fundamental concern is what is going to be best for certain sections of island society when they are on marginalised communities. So that's the way that I will vote. In terms of my other point, it was very quickly to say, rhetorically to Councillor Fuller in relation to that issue of the tilted balance, I appreciate it is something which does obtain. But the question is, has the committee sought to approve everything that has come before it, notwithstanding the fact that the tilted balance does obtain? And the question is no, it has not. We have considered things on the merits. So if there are reasons not to approve an application, on a material planning consideration, they are considered, they are debated, and ultimately we have rejected those. So that argument I would suggest about that we do need to be careful, I agree with that, but it's not a foregone conclusion. We do need to have some time. I think a period of reflection is useful. So I would certainly commend Councillor Spink's motion. Thank you.
Okay, we need to know the wording is first, but yeah, I do agree with you. Point I will make is that we're getting completely bogged down by the number of houses allowable in the island plan. Those of you, like me, have read probably most of it. There are other really important things in there, like increasing average earnings to £600 a week, improving educational outcomes, improving health outcomes. There's a lot of other things that we're delaying by focusing on housing. Now, in theory, the market, whatever number we agree in the island plan, if there is no requirement, as Councillor Spink says, because people aren't moving here, then the market will sort itself out because the houses won't sell. But that, again, is, I guess, is guesswork. So I'm going to summarise what I think your motion is, Councillor Spink. Please tell me if I'm wrong. Is that you're proposing a delay in putting forward the island plan until we are aware of what government policy is? Is that about right? Okay, so delay it until November. Okay, so have you got a seconder for that motion? Councillor Drew, yeah. And those in favour of delaying?
1, 2, 3, 4. That's 4, Chairman.
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Chairman.
Okay.
It's lost.
It's lost, but I do make the point that Cabinet are, if they wish, can take that suggestion forward anyway. Okay, moving on to last 2 points. So corporate complaints annual report.
Right.
Who's taking that one? Yeah, you can do it briefly. We'll let you do it briefly tonight, Councillor John. Well, I'm hoping that we don't need to go quite that long. How long do you think you need to go through? As long as that? 20 minutes? Let's have 5-minute comfort break. Then we start at 1:45, and we'll keep you to 5 past. Yeah, back at 1:45. corporate complaints annual report. Councillor Jarman, I've suggested that Councillor Jarman doesn't need to read the report out, just to make us aware of any issues or exceptions he has, and then it is up to us as the Scrutiny Committee to pick up anything we've noticed in the report that we've read. So, Councillor Jarman, if you'd like to carry on.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So, agenda item 8, to start with that one, which is the corporate complaint annual report for the year 21-22. You've all had it and you've all had a chance to read it. I don't propose to go through it. The only thing I would do is note that some of the information which is in it is given on a percentage basis. And we had a discussion of this earlier. And when a result changes from 7 to 8, it does give a disproportionate impression if that is presented as a percentage figure. So we may look at changing some of those to absolute numbers in the future, rather than what seems to be a rather convoluted figure regarding the percentage. The other thing is just to note at the end of the paper, of course, that we have met the target within it for stage 1, which was set some time ago now at 90%, and we've actually met and indeed exceeded that target and managed to deal with resolving 92% of those at stage 1. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to take them.
That was even briefer than I thought. Oh, you caught me out. Councillor Roberts, then Councillor Maitland.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Jarman, page 63, is it really correct that there's only been 4 complaints about the Cowes floating bridge? And of those 4 complaints, there were no learning outcomes at all?
Yes, I can only go with the figures that I've been presented with from the staff. Anecdotally, I would have expected there to be a much higher figure, but the figure that's here is 4. I suspect that some of these may have come under different categories. That's the only thing I can consider here. But I'm happy to go back and recheck that yet again and revert to you with an update in terms of clarification of that.
Councillor Maitland.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Jarman, I'm wondering if, I know there's a number of people, a number of complaints, ombudsman's complaints is quite small, but I imagine they do take up a great deal of time. And I'm wondering, is there any way that we as ward members or as councillors in general could be involved in the process so that we can help to solve the problem before it gets to being an ombudsman or it gets to be at this point and gets very, very time consuming? Is there some way we could be brought in to assist officers perhaps to resolve disputes?
So there is a rather formal process which is engaged on these things to date. And the reason it's a formal process is because we want to be very consistent in the way we deal with complaints, and to make sure that if they are escalated through different levels, that we track that within our system, that they're managed accordingly. But I'll certainly take away the idea and see if there is a way that ward members, elected members, can be involved in the process as you suggest. I'm slightly hesitant about it because I know it is a pretty formal process managed by a very excellent team, but I'm happy to take it away and discuss it with them.
Councillor Andre, then just to warn Councillor Garrett, I'm going to Councillor Garrett because he'd like to raise a point.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add, certainly in terms of my own portfolio, there is a very structured process that has to be followed, and it would be inappropriate for me to actually involve myself in that process, as it could prejudice it moving forward. So it's actually important that I allow the due complaints process to take place. Thank you.
Sorry, we've got Councillor Garrett, she's on, then Councillor Quirk, then Cameron Paley.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully I've unmuted successfully. That's great. Chair, you may recall that I am your predecessor but one, and I brought forward a complaints report a couple or 3 years ago now about the council's complaint process. One of the things I'm very particularly concerned about to see on the paper today is the low level of learning outcomes. 18% again of complaints not only having a learning outcome suggests to me that something is wrong. I would expect a learning outcome from very much more than half of the complaints. And unless they are completely spurious, which I cannot imagine the people of the Isle of Wight are engaging with overwhelmingly in spurious complaints. I'm particularly concerned, and there may be a logistical reason why waste services seem to be reporting out of 136 complaints, nothing from which they have learned, which does seem a little unlikely and should be looked into. The final point I would make, and it was a point I'm sure I made in my report a couple of years ago or more, was in order to make a complaint, you have to log in. To log in, you have to have an account. That is a barrier to making a complaint. It really does need to be removed from our website. There is nothing wrong with a person just putting forward their complaint online with appropriate identifying details if necessary, without them needing to establish an account online. A lot of people don't want to go down that route. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon, would you like to address that now?
Yes, certainly. I think I know the complaint, you can log in and make a complaint from the website without actually logging in, because I actually tried it myself before I came to the meeting today to make sure that it was working. So that isn't a barrier to people making complaints. I know that when Councillor Garrett was chair of this committee, that was the case, but John Metcalfe took that forward and made that change some 18 months ago, so that shouldn't be a barrier. Picking up the point about learning outcomes, we've done a lot of work with the nominated complaints officers to make sure that they are logging learning outcomes. What we did find from this latest process of reviewing the learning is that some of our colleagues are not using the right fields on CRM to actually record the learning outcomes. So although they believe that they're recording them, as far as we're concerned, they're not being reported through the CRM process. And I think there is some work that we need to be doing to take away, to work with NCOs, to explain to them what learning outcomes are and how they need to be recording them. And that's something that we've picked up from this latest analysis.
Thank you. Councillor Quirk and Cameron
Paley. 2 points. I think it's inappropriate to have members involved in the formal process, but if members, a lot of people will come to you if you are accessible. There are quite a number of members who don't actually give a phone number that people can actually contact you, and that's, I think, is an issue. And it might be interesting to just look at whether accessibility of members and complaints that are inversely proportionate. But so that was one option, but because a lot of things that could be complaints, if people phone you, you can deal with. The second is, it's people who come to me who have made formal complaints seem to feel that the first stage of the complaint is they're just being poo-pooed and pushed away, and that you only actually get a response to your complaint if you progress into the second or third stage. And I would just wonder if there is any truth in that. That is a perception that is held by people who have complained.
When did you want to reply now? And then we'll come to you, Cameron.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm slightly picking up on what Councillor Quirk was saying and Councillor Medland, in that this is about the formal complaints process. So we go through a formal stage 1, stage 2 onto the local government ombudsman. I think as a council, there is more that we can do at an informal stage in terms of working with ward members and working with local members and services and local residents to get to the stage where we are resolving issues without the need for a formal complaint. So rather than it being, we might have more formal complaints if more people could make them, I think there's more to be done to work with local councillors and local residents to run through some of those issues before they need to become a formal complaint. We should always be seeking to make sure that our level of formal complaints are as low as possible, because we should be looking to resolve and work with residents and work with our ward councillors and town and parish councils before things escalate to being a formal complaint.
That's a fair point. Cameron, and then we've got Councillor Garrett again.
It was just a quick one, really. In regards to children's services, obviously there was 20 complaints there, and Councillor Andre set out on there's a clear process for that. But it'd be interesting to know whether these are organisations such as schools, if they've had, you know, not the detail, but whether these are formal complaints by schools that have been put in or individuals, and if there's a way that, you know, that was differentiated to know whether they are high-level concerns from organisations such as those.
Fair enough. I'll go to Councillor Andre now, and then to Councillor Garrett.
Just before I answer Councillor Palin's question, I'd just like to clarify. In my comments, I was talking to this paper, which, as Chair quite rightly highlighted, is the formal complaints. I think we need to be careful here, and I do agree with Councillor Quirk that as ward members, we do play an absolutely essential role, and people do come to us, and we can stop things from escalating. I was talking that obviously I do get people coming directly to me as Cabinet Member for Children's Services, as Cabinet Member for Education, and that's what I was referring to. So I'd just like to put that out there. I think in terms of the Children's Services, I think we probably do have that data, but the thing is, I think it is important as well that we do protect the identity to a degree of complainants. So it's only right and proper that we actually focus on the nature of the complaint, not the complainant as such. Thank you.
Councillor Garrett. Somebody's got that. Yes, it is.
Hello again, Chair. So first of all, I should correct myself that it is actually right that you don't have to submit a complaint online through one of the procedures of the council's complaint process. But having checked that were for adult social care, it seems that we still do have to have a login procedure there. That may be a feature of the beta website not being in line with the ordinary website. But I wanted for the record just to acknowledge that Ms. Betts is absolutely right, that the main way of complaining does indeed allow for complaints not being logged in. So I withdraw that bit of my concern, but I do have a concern that a great big red message appears for those wishing to make complaints about adult social care, or at least how it comes through on my screen here. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got health scrutiny on Monday, so we can bring that up then. Okay, any further points anyone would like to make? I know from Children's Scrutiny last week, you've got a dedicated team now for customer service, as it were, or customer or complaints, which seems to be paying dividends. Now, I know everything's tight, and I wouldn't say, Sharon, you have to do this, but it may be an idea that we consider that in some way you have an officer responsible for this area, if it's appropriate. But thank you. Anything else at all to add? Or should we move on? Excellent. Quarterly performance monitoring, item 9. Is that you again, Councillor John?
It is. Thank you, Chair. So the first thing to do is to note that there's an interesting issue which occurs with these quarterly updates, that we are here looking at the figures for the end of June, which are themselves quite out of date now, at least some 9 or 10 weeks. And so at the last session I had reviewing these, I've asked that we find a way to be much more timely in bringing forward these details. Whether they come forward to a formal meeting or not is probably of secondary importance. The fact is we must have timely information with which to make decisions and to evaluate our performance. So I would like to find a way that we can bring forward in an automated way much of the numerical analysis that we do by the end of the month following the quarter in which it reports on. I don't think that should be beyond the realms of possibility and would empower us to make more accurate decision making and indeed to address issues that arise much quicker. So that has been raised. The rest of the paper, I'm sure you've read in detail. It is interesting that today we had another meeting earlier this afternoon, and we were looking at current data rather than data at the end of June. So again, I find it rather perplexing that I have to throw my mind back to the end of June and give you figures from that period. But you will see already at the end of page 71 that there is a number of areas of particular pressure, financial pressure within the council, which we are seeking to address. The main areas, of course, being adult social care and children's services, but also leisure services. Those figures have accelerated from the figures that were end of June and are not headed in a particularly good direction. The way to deal with those figures is by some savings which are being brought forward, some savings which are resulting from our efforts in treasury management, and also by taking money from the contingency funds which we have available. Those routes would seem to be rather short term in many ways. We cannot continue to fund that operation by taking money indefinitely from reserves. We do need a way to solve these issues much more strategically, whether that involves additional funding from government or indeed some restructuring or readdressing of the priorities that we have is yet to be brought forward. But those are the key things that were the focus of the meeting today. If there are any other questions on a particular section, I'm sure I or in any of the other Cabinet members who are present will be pleased to address them.
Questions? Councillor Medland.
Well, actually, it's already been answered. I mean, because I was going to query why this information looks so historic, and you've dealt with that, because it's extraordinary looking at all these green indicators, and you think, well, where we are now is things have moved incredibly fast in 3 months, and we're in a very, very different situation here, and it is kind of odd looking at this ancient material. It seems old, but it's great that you've already dealt with that problem. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really a no-brainer that we need timely information. And it's not only important to this committee, of course, it's important to Cabinet and as important to the Finance Group and to every Cabinet member who has a responsibility for working with the team to manage the finances in their respective areas. So everybody will benefit from that improvement.
Councillor Drew.
Thank you, Chair. As Councillor Jarman has mentioned reporting, I'm particularly drawn to paragraph 11 in relation to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and the importance of consulting younger people. I wondered whether he could draw my attention. Is there any particular area on the council website where I can look at those statistics in terms of the consultations? Because I think quite often it's so buried very deeply in reports. And I think, for example, when it comes to the Island Plan, the number of people under 30 or indeed under 20 who were consulted and responded, it is woeful and exceptionally concerning. In fact, concerning to the point that I would suggest there's an Article 6 issue. So in terms of where we can get that information, could you direct me, Councillor John? Thank you.
Yeah, so on the new website, I tried it myself. If you come into the main new website, I think we'll be calling it new for quite some time, actually. But if you come into the new website and you go into the search box, which is there, and do consultation, it will do it. We do actually have a section within the website which deals with consultations. But it is, if you are not familiar with managing a website, very, very difficult to get to. I appreciate that. I've replied to many of the consultations myself, and I think it's good practice, by the way, if every elected member does that. It gives you first-hand experience. I've also assisted local people who've been trying to reply to consultations to do so. We have had a few examples where they are extremely difficult. One, for example, recently was on a TRO. So there was a TRO which came up, and actually finding how to reply to the TRO was very difficult. The answer came when we got to a website which invited you to reply to the TRO, only to find out that because you weren't one of the statutory bodies who were able to reply to it, your comment and consultation was rejected automatically. That's now being addressed, I'm happy to say, but it showed to me a very clear example how people's misunderstanding of different processes was not helped by the information on the website. So I think there is a process to address these. It is ongoing, and I think all of us, by trying these websites ourselves, will experience that firsthand, and we can feed the information back. I'm not saying that a comment or a proposed correction by an elected member takes any greater priority than a resident, but I do think it helps.
Any further questions? I wonder if there's some value in us just having exception reporting, because whilst it's nice to see green, it's the amber and red that really tells us where we're going and what needs to be done. So that might be one suggestion I would make. think it's the performance management framework is due for review in 2023. I think it's important we put that on the scrutiny committee as members. I think we need to have sight of this because I think we can feel very uninvolved in the performance review. And I think we need to have a review of that, so we'll put that on the work plan. But other than that, I mean, you know, the data's there. It is a lot of data. All I'd ask is there any way it can be made easier for whoever needs to collate it to collate it? And then one point in terms of numbers is there's a consistent overspend of the registrar. Sorry, what am I trying to say, Paul? Coroner and registrar. So there seems to either be some misunderstanding of the budget in that area, and it's not an accurate budget, or an inability to control spend. I know Karen's not here, but I'll ask Karen to give a written response to that.
I think we're already aware of the coroner issue in the reporting and on the expenditure. I think we'll look at the exception idea, but it's a difficult balance, because if we only provide exception reporting and and not the detail, there are an awful lot of people who I know go through the detail, some with a fine-tooth comb, and are particularly interested in the nuance. They're also particularly interested in the delta between a previous report and this report, which shows a potential problem or trend. So the value of the data isn't only in the exceptions, and maybe we could do an exception report as well, but I think the value of the information is the longevity of the information that we have and the trends that it evidences.
No, that is a fair point. I think I was just trying to make life easier. I think Andrew Garrett wants to speak as well. But one other last point I will make is the UN sustainability objectives feature very heavily in this report. Now, either I missed something or that's the first time I've seen them feature quite so heavily in the report. Is that adding to the report, or is it taken away? And that's not a statement, it is a genuine question. You don't feel you have to answer it now.
All right, I won't.
Oh no, Councillor Garrett, did you want? I've got Councillor Quirk as well. Or was that a legacy hand, as they say? I think it was a legacy hand.
Sorry, Chair, I was a legacy hand.
I'll let you off. Councillor Quirk.
Without going to sort of exception reports, it's much easier to see trends if you've actually got something like a bar chart, monthly figures of what it is and against budget, and the same year to date as where you are and against budget. And something like that makes it much, much easier to actually see what's going on. And I would, sometimes I think we get the information in such a way that it's very hard to understand, and it should be easy to understand. We should have information rather than data.
That's a fair point, Councillor Quirk. And I think if we put that onto the performance management framework, onto the work plan, then we can address that issue there. Any further comments on quarter performance? No, very good. So we move on to the last item, members' questions. Oh, Cameron.
Just one quick one. On page 124, it says East Cales traffic management signs, 119,000. I would have thought that would have come under the floating bridge if it's the ones I'm thinking of, the information signs in regards to whether the floating bridge is running, which I know was also part funded by the Isle of Wight Council, and I was wondering why that wasn't necessarily under that particular heading, but named something slightly different, if that makes sense. 124.
So which line on here are we looking at? The
East Cales traffic management signs.
Right, so that's the Isle of Wight Council component of it.
Right.
There is a red funnel contribution to it. One could argue that it's not entirely of our making in the circumstances, but
so that's in relation to the floating bridge, isn't it, and those signs?
Well, it's also about the general operation. So there have been a number of signs actually over the last year. The ones that you're probably familiar with are the ones that sit up at the racecourse roundabout. Have you seen those? Those are the ones I'm most familiar with. There have actually been other red funnel signs that I've seen from time to time, but I don't think we contribute to the other ones. It's just the one which is indicating this status. The Coppins Bridge one was a temporary one, wasn't it? Is it still there now? Still there now. I think the key thing with those is it's very important to catch people and redirect them at the earliest opportunity. And if people are coming round Coppins Bridge as a roundabout, it's good to intercept them there with information rather than them going all along fairly, getting to the racecourse roundabout, hitting another sign and coming all the way back again. Rather than the gates any of our ecological moves that we might be trying to put into place.
Don't think you're disputing the.
What I'm saying is I think that should come under the floating bridge heading, because that's what it's in regards to, rather than another budget heading, because that's attributed to the floating bridge.
Okay.
If it's what I'm thinking.
We'll look at that, Cameron.
Any further points? Okay. Item 10, members' question time. Any questions from members we haven't already asked? Wow. Excellent. So thank you all again for your time and patience. It is much appreciated. Enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you.
And the half-hour estimate for additional time was completely accurate.